A key turned in a familiar lock. The cottage door swung inward on hinges. She had oiled herself in 2003. A woman in a black coat stood on the threshold and stared at a room she had not seen in 22 years. Her name was Lorna Pike. She was 52 years old. She had walked out of this marital cottage on a Tuesday morning in October of 2004 with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag, and had never set foot in it again. This morning she had driven up from the city at the request of her ex-husband's lawyer to sign the final transfer of the deed. Her ex-husband, Daniel Pike, had passed away last month at the age of 63 after a long illness. He had left the cottage to her in his will. She did not want the cottage. She had told the lawyer so on the phone. The lawyer had asked her to come up anyway. She had agreed. She had stood at the door for 10 minutes before turning the key. Now she walked inside. The cottage was exactly the way she had left it. Same kettle, same calendar pinned to October 2004. A red circle around the 8th. She had drawn that circle herself. Why had Daniel left her a cottage she had not slept in for 22 years? Stay with me on this one. Lorna and Daniel had met in the summer of 1992 at a wedding in upstate Connecticut. She had been 22 years old. He had been 31. He had been a quiet structural engineer who had built bridges for the state highway department. She had been a junior copywriter at a small advertising firm in Hartford. They had been seated together at a round table near the back of the reception. They had talked through dinner and through the cake and through the long, slow last hour of the dance. They had married 18 months later at a small ceremony in the same Connecticut town. The wedding had been small. 42 guests. A folding tent in her uncle's backyard. A three-piece string ensemble. A sheet cake with white roses. Daniel had worn a charcoal suit a half size too big. Lorna had worn her mother's dress and a small silver pendant in the shape of a wren. The wren had been her mother's gift on the morning of the ceremony. Her mother had clasped it around her neck and had said, "This is the bird that sings before sunrise." They had bought the cottage in 1997. The cottage sat on a wooded lake in northwestern Connecticut, 3 miles from the nearest paved road. They had spent every weekend of 7 years driving up from the city to spend Saturdays and Sundays at the lake. They had planted a row of black-eyed Susans along the side path. They had screened in the small porch off the parlor. They had argued only twice in those years and made up before the second night. They had been happy. They had been trying for 5 years of their marriage to have a baby. There had been 3 pregnancies. There had been 3 losses. The first at 12 weeks. The second at 15. The third at 22. Each loss had been at the cottage. Each loss had been on a weekend. Each loss had been quiet, terrible, in a private bathroom on a Saturday afternoon, with Daniel at the door pretending to be calm and Lorna's body proving that calm was a lie. The third loss had been in September of 2004. The doctor had told them, at the follow-up appointment, that there was a structural problem in Lorna's uterus that would never carry a pregnancy to term. The doctor had told them that surrogacy and adoption were the only remaining roads. Daniel had not said much in the doctor's office. He had said even less in the car on the way home. He had been very quiet at the cottage that weekend. He had spent Saturday afternoon out at the lake with a fishing rod he did not cast. On the Tuesday morning after the doctor's appointment, Lorna had come downstairs in her bathrobe and found Daniel at the kitchen table with 2 suitcases packed on the floor next to his chair. He had told her quietly that he had been thinking. He had told her he could not raise another woman's baby. He had told her he could not adopt. He had told her he had tried for 5 years to be brave and that he had run out of brave. He had told her he needed to leave. She had not believed him. She had asked him if he was leaving her or leaving the idea of children. He had said both. She had stood in the kitchen in her bathrobe for a long, quiet moment. Then she had walked upstairs. She had packed her 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. She had walked out the front door of the cottage with the bags on her shoulders. She had driven into the city. She had checked into a small hotel. She had not gone back to the cottage. The divorce had been quiet and amicable. They had split the city apartment evenly. They had split the savings evenly. Daniel had kept the cottage because he had paid the down payment from his own savings before they had married. Lorna had not contested. She had not seen the cottage in 22 years. She had not seen Daniel in 22 years. She had heard through a friend of a friend that he had remarried in 2008 to a quiet, kind violin teacher named Marion. She had heard through the same friend that they had adopted a daughter from Korea in 2011. She had not asked for more news after that. She had thought it would be cruel to ask. She had built her own life. She had been promoted at the advertising firm. She had become a creative director. She had eventually opened a small, one-woman copywriting consultancy. She had bought a small condo in Hartford. She had not remarried. She had dated 3 or 4 men over the years, none seriously. She had a circle of close friends and a long history of careful work and a quiet, contained life. A month ago, Daniel's lawyer had called. Daniel had been ill for 3 years with a long, quiet cancer. He had passed peacefully at home. He had left the cottage to Lorna. The lawyer had said, "Daniel asked me to tell you in person that he had wanted you to have the cottage for many years. He had not known how to give it to you while he was alive. He had decided in the last summer to leave it to you. He had a reason. The reason is in the cottage." Lorna had asked what the reason was. The lawyer had said, "Daniel asked that you find it yourself." Now she stood in the kitchen. She set her purse down on the kitchen table. She walked through the cottage room by room. The cottage had 4 small rooms: a kitchen, a parlor, a bedroom, a bathroom. There was a small stone fireplace in the parlor. There was a wooden mantel above the fireplace. There was a single framed photograph on the mantel. The photograph was of Lorna and Daniel on their wedding day in 1993. She remembered the photograph. She had taken it down from this mantel before she had walked out of the cottage in 2004. She had wrapped it in a kitchen towel and packed it in her duffel bag. She had not thrown it away. She had put it in the back of a closet in her city apartment. She had moved several times in 22 years. The framed photograph had moved with her each time. It now sat at the back of a closet in her condo in Hartford. This photograph on the mantel was not the photograph she had taken with her. This photograph was a duplicate. The same photograph. The same frame. The same chip on the corner of the frame, where Daniel had bumped it on a doorframe in 1995. She moved through the rest of the cottage first. The bedroom looked freshly aired. The quilt on the bed was the same blue and white pattern her grandmother had stitched. The bathroom had a fresh bar of plain white soap on the porcelain dish. Someone had been here this week. She walked back into the parlor. The chimney was still warm from a small morning fire. Embers glowed at the back of the grate. The lawyer had been here. He had laid a fire. He had set the deed papers in a neat stack on the coffee table beside a fountain pen, and a small lamp turned to its lowest setting. The deed papers were tabbed in yellow at the signature line. The lawyer had clipped a sticky note to the front page. The note read, "Take your time, Mrs. Pike. I will return at 4. Please sign only when you are ready." She sat down on the small parlor sofa. She slid the papers toward her. She uncapped the pen. The afternoon was very quiet. The lake at the end of the path was very still. A loon called once, far out on the water, and then again closer. She set the pen down without signing. She lifted the photograph off the mantel. She turned it over. A small plastic hospital wristband was taped to the back of the frame. The wristband was old. The plastic had yellowed. The print had faded but was still legible. The wristband read, "Pike Lorna A. DOB 3/12/1972. Admit 9/28/2004. Hartford General Hospital." Lorna stood with the photograph in her hands. She had not been admitted to Hartford General Hospital on September 28, 2004. She had been at the cottage on September 28, 2004. She had been at the cottage with Daniel. She had gone into a slow, terrible bleeding at 3 in the morning on the 28th. Daniel had wrapped her in a wool blanket and lifted her into the front seat of his car and driven her at high speed down the long, winding county road and then north onto the highway. The nearest hospital had been Hartford General, an hour and 15 minutes away. She remembered the drive in fragments. She remembered Daniel saying her name over and over. She remembered the hospital doors. She remembered the gurney. She remembered being told that they had lost the baby. She did not remember anything after that for 2 days. She had been told, when she had woken up on the morning of the 30th, that she had bled so badly in the ambulance bay that she had nearly died. She had been told she had needed 3 units of blood. She had been told she had needed an emergency procedure to stop the hemorrhage. She had been told she was very lucky. She had been told nothing more. She had spent 4 days in the hospital. Daniel had been at her bedside the whole time. Daniel had driven her home to the city apartment when she had been discharged. The follow-up appointment with the doctor had been 10 days later. She did not remember a hospital wristband. She did not remember anyone telling her what name had been on her wristband. She turned the wristband over. There was a small smudge on the back. She rubbed it with her thumb. The smudge was old dried blood. It was her own. She set the photograph down on the mantel. She walked to the kitchen table. She sat down. She did not know what the wristband was telling her. She had nearly died. She knew that. She had been told that. The wristband simply confirmed what she had been told. So why had Daniel kept it? Why had he taped it to the back of their wedding photograph? Why had he left her the cottage so she would find it? She sat at the kitchen table for half an hour. She did not understand. She rose. She walked back to the parlor. She lifted the photograph again. She turned it over. She studied the wristband. She looked at the bottom of the wristband. There was a second line of print, faded almost to invisibility in smaller type. The second line read, admitting physician, Dr. M. Hellman, M.D. Ward Maternity. Maternity. Lorna sat down on the parlor floor. She had been in maternity. She had assumed all these years that she had been in some kind of emergency or surgical ward. She had assumed she had been treated by an emergency physician after the loss of the pregnancy had stopped being a pregnancy. The wristband said maternity. If she had been in maternity, the loss had not been complete in the ambulance. If she had been in maternity, there had been a delivery. Lorna set the photograph down on the parlor floor. She did not move for a long time. Then she stood up. She walked to her purse. She got out her phone. She dialed Daniel's lawyer. The lawyer answered on the second ring. Lorna said, "There is a hospital wristband taped to the back of the wedding photograph on the parlor mantel. The wristband says maternity ward. I need to know what happened on the 28th of September, 2004. The lawyer was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Pike," the lawyer said carefully, "I think you should sit down." "I am sitting down," Lorna said. "If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. Stay with me. This is where it turns." The lawyer drove up from his office in the city that afternoon. He arrived at the cottage at 4 in the afternoon, exactly as the sticky note had promised. He had brought with him a thick manila folder and a folding chair, in case Lorna had not yet found the kitchen chairs, and a thermos of coffee. He sat down at the kitchen table. He poured 2 paper cups from the thermos. He pushed one across to Lorna without asking. The coffee was strong and black. She held it in both hands. She did not drink. He opened the manila folder. He laid the contents out in front of her, page by page. The first page was a hospital record from Hartford General, dated September 28, 2004. It was a delivery record. It recorded the birth of a baby girl at 4:42 in the morning, 23 weeks gestation, weight 1 pound 3 ounces. The mother was Lorna Pike. The father was Daniel Pike. The condition of the mother at the time of delivery was critical. The condition of the baby at the time of delivery was critical. The second page was a hospital record from the same morning, dated September 28, 2004 at 5:17 in the morning. The record was a transfer record. The baby girl, named Pike, baby girl, had been transferred to the neonatal intensive care unit at Hartford General Hospital. The baby's status had been upgraded from critical to stable. The third page was a hospital record from October 14, 2004. The record was a discharge summary from the NICU. The baby, who had been named on the discharge record as Myra Aliner Pike, had been discharged at 6 weeks of age, 2.5 pounds, into the custody of her father, Daniel Pike. The mother's signature was absent. There was a note in the margin: mother not in condition to receive notification, transferred to outpatient care on October 4. Father has sole custody, pending mother's recovery. The fourth page was a letter in Daniel's hand, dated November 22, 2004. The letter was addressed to my lawyer. The letter said, "I have made a decision that I am not proud of. My wife had a premature delivery on September 28. The baby is alive in the NICU. My wife is not aware of this. She was not conscious for the delivery and was heavily sedated for 2 days afterward. When she woke up, she was told that we had lost another baby. She accepted this. I did not correct her. I did not correct her because I did not know how. I have been at the NICU every night for 6 weeks. The baby is going to live. The doctors have told me she will be in the NICU for another 6 weeks. After that, she will come home with me. I do not believe Lorna can carry the weight of another loss right now. The doctor told us on the morning of October 8 that her body will never carry another pregnancy. She broke that day at the doctor's office. She has not yet been told that this baby lived. I have been waiting for her to be strong enough. I have decided I will wait until the baby is 6 months old. If the baby is healthy at 6 months, I will tell Lorna. If the baby is not healthy at 6 months, I will tell Lorna at the appropriate time. In the meantime, my mother has agreed to come and stay with me and care for the baby when I am at work. The baby will not lack for care. I have written this letter so that there is a record. I have asked my lawyer to keep it sealed and to give it to Lorna only if I die before I tell her. I do not intend to die. I intend to tell her on March 28, 2005, when the baby is 6 months old. Lorna set the letter down. She put both hands over her mouth. The lawyer continued, very gently. He had 2 more letters in the folder. The second letter, dated April 2, 2005, was in Daniel's hand. The letter said, I did not tell her on March 28. I had planned to drive into the city. I had planned to take her out for dinner. I had planned to tell her at dinner. The day before, on the 27th, she called me about the divorce papers. She told me in the call that she had been in therapy since November. She told me she had finally accepted that we would never have children. She told me she was finally sleeping through the night. She told me in the call that she had begun to date a kind man named Henry from her office, and that she was thinking she might be able to be happy. I did not tell her about the baby. I canceled the dinner. I told her I was sick. I drove home from work to the apartment in the city, which I was now renting, and I sat at my kitchen table and I cried for 2 hours. Then I drove back to the cottage where my mother was with the baby. I have decided I cannot tell her now. She has built a small new life. Telling her about the baby would tear that life apart. She would have to choose. She would have to come back to me, or fight me for custody, or try to share custody, or live with the knowledge that her daughter is being raised by another woman. I cannot do that to her. I have decided to raise the baby as my own. My mother has agreed. We will tell the baby the truth when she is old enough to understand. I am writing this letter so that there is a record. I have asked my lawyer to keep it sealed. Lorna lowered her hands from her mouth. She was not crying. She was too stunned to cry. The lawyer slid the third letter across the table. The third letter, dated September 14, 2025, was the most recent. It was in Daniel's hand, but the hand was shakier, the writing slower. The letter said, "I am dying. The cancer has come back. I have a few months. I have not told my daughter Myra that her biological mother is alive in Hartford. I have not told my second wife Marion either. I have only told my lawyer. I am sorry. I have been a coward for 21 years. I have raised my daughter as my own. She is a kind, brilliant young woman of 21, finishing her senior year at college, studying engineering at MIT. She knows that her biological mother and I divorced when she was a baby. She believes her biological mother chose not to know her. She does not know that her biological mother does not know she exists. I have decided, now that I am dying, that I cannot leave the truth in my lawyer's safe. I have decided to leave the cottage to Lorna. I have asked my lawyer to drive her up. I have asked my lawyer to tell her in this kitchen what I have done. I have asked my lawyer to give her Myra's phone number and Myra's school address and a recent photograph. I have asked my lawyer to tell her that I am sorry. I have been sorry for 21 years. I was a frightened young husband who lost his courage on the morning of October 8, 2004, in a doctor's office in Hartford. I have been making up for that morning for 21 years by trying to be a good father. I have not made up for it. I should have told her on March 28, 2005. I should have told her every day of the last 21 years. I did not. I love my daughter. I love my second wife. I have loved Lorna for 33 years. I will love her until the end of this month. I am sorry. Please forgive me. The lawyer set the letter down. He waited. He did not push. Lorna sat at the kitchen table for a long, quiet stretch. The chimney clock in the parlor struck the half hour. A log shifted in the grate. The lake outside held its black mirror. When she could speak again, her voice was very small. "Where is she?" she said. The lawyer slid a small index card across the table. The card had a name and a phone number on it. There was a recent photograph clipped to the card. The photograph showed a tall young woman in her early 20s, standing on a campus quad in autumn light. She had dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail. She had Lorna's mouth. She had Daniel's eyes. She was carrying an engineering textbook against her chest and laughing at someone off-frame. Myra Eleanor Pike. Lorna held the photograph. Her thumb covered the bottom corner. She did not weep. She had not wept yet. The lawyer stayed for an hour more. He asked her if she wanted him to drive her back to Hartford. She said no. He asked her if she wanted him to stay the night at the small inn down the road. She said no. He asked her, finally, if there was anything he could do for her at this moment. Lorna looked at the wedding photograph on the mantel. Lorna said, "Did he ever come back to this cottage?" The lawyer said, "Yes. Every Sunday. For 21 years. He drove up with Myra when she was small. He drove up with Myra and Marion when Myra was older. He sat on the porch on Sunday afternoons. He told them this was the house where their family began." Lorna closed her eyes. The lawyer rose. He shook her hand. He left the manila folder on the table. He left the thermos. He left the index card. He drove back down the long county road. Lorna sat alone at the kitchen table for another hour. Then she walked through the cottage one more time. She opened the bedroom closet. There were 2 cardboard boxes on the top shelf. The boxes were labeled in Daniel's hand: Myra, ages 110. Myra, ages 1121. She did not open them tonight. She would open them next weekend. She would weep later, in the small motel room she would check into that evening, after the lawyer had driven back to the city. She would weep for 2 hours straight. She would weep for the daughter she had not known existed. She would weep for the 21 years she had not had. She would weep for the cottage she had walked out of. She would weep for the husband who had been a coward and a father. She would weep for the doctor's appointment on October 8. She would weep for the wedding photograph on the mantel. Then she would wash her face. She would call the number on the index card the next morning. A young woman would answer on the third ring. Lorna would say very carefully, "My name is Lorna Pike. Your father left a letter for me last week. There is a great deal I would like to explain to you. May I drive up to your campus this weekend?" There would be a long, quiet pause. Myra Alina Pike would say, in a voice that was steadier than Lorna had any right to hope for, "Yes. Please come. I have known for 3 months. Dad told me in August. I have been waiting to meet you." The conversation would last 23 minutes. Lorna would drive up the next Saturday. She would meet her daughter for the first time in 21 years in a small coffee shop in Cambridge. Myra would be wearing a green wool coat and a small silver pendant. The pendant would have a wren on it. The wren would have been a gift from Lorna's own mother, given to Lorna at her wedding in 1993, lost in the move out of the cottage in 2004, found by Daniel under a kitchen drawer 6 months later, and given to baby Myra in the NICU in 2004 by a young father who had not known what else to put around her wrist. Myra would have worn it every day of her life. She would have asked her father when she was 9 what bird it was. He would have told her, "This is the bird that sings before sunrise." He would not have told her where the saying came from. He would have meant it anyway. Lorna would not weep at the coffee shop. She would order a cup of black tea. She would sit across from her daughter. She would notice the small things first. The way Myra held her cup with both hands. The way Myra tucked one foot behind the other under the table. The way Myra pushed her hair behind her ear with the back of her wrist. These were her own gestures, returned to her across 21 years by a stranger she had made. She would say quietly the simplest sentence she could manage. "Hello." Myra would smile. Her eyes would fill, but she would not let them spill. "Hello, Mom." It would be enough for the first hour. It would be enough for the first afternoon. They would talk about small things. Myra's classes. The professor who had told her she had a good mind for load-bearing math. The roommate who left wet towels on the floor. The thesis on cable-stayed bridges she was writing in her father's old handwriting because she could not bear to type it. They would talk about the cottage. Myra would say she wanted to see it. Lorna would say she would take her there in the spring, when the black-eyed Susans came back along the side path. Myra would say yes. Lorna would drive back to Hartford that evening with her hands steady on the wheel. She would not be the woman who had driven up to the cottage 3 weeks before. That woman had been carrying a closed door. This woman was carrying a small open window, and a name she had not known, and a wren on a silver chain around the neck of a young engineer in Cambridge. She would return to the cottage in April. She would sign the deed in the same parlor where she had read the letters. She would keep the cottage. She would air it out room by room. She would replace the calendar above the back door with a new one and circle no dates in red. She would put fresh wood by the fireplace. She would leave the wedding photograph on the mantel. She would tape no wristband to the back of it. She would put a small framed photograph of Myra on the mantel beside it instead. In May, Myra would come up for a weekend. She would walk the path down to the lake with her mother. She would skip a flat stone across the still water. She would say, "Dad used to do that here." Lorna would say, "I know. He taught me." They would sit on the screened porch in the late afternoon. The loons would call. Lorna would not say the word forgive out loud, not that weekend, not that summer. She would carry it quietly in her chest like a small warm coal. She had been told it would take a long time. She did not yet know how long. She knew only that the small open window was open, and that her daughter was on the other side of it, and that the cottage was hers, and that the wren still sang before sunrise. It would be enough.